Hi, I am SB Rawz, a coach and a messy whole human. And this is Sarah Hines joining me for another all up in it conversation. 35-ish minutes of reporting from the complicated and exhilarating midst of learning. Uh, Thank you for being with me today, Sarah. I'm having a great time already. We're just starting to record.
I love it. I love it. And thank you. Thank you for making this whole magic happen.
Yeah, gosh, it's just a delight and an honor. And I'm really excited to hear how you understand yourself or describe yourself as a human these days.
This is such a big one. And we don't start small, we get right into it.
Right
Um,
in.
I feel like I'm a little bit of a firekeeper. Like I'm a little bit of like, I'm in a lodge kind of stirring a pot a little bit. Yeah, I'm feeling a little inward for the most part. And I feel like I'm waiting for people to come. Do you know what I mean? Like to come and sit down around a fire and have some soup and have
Mm,
a conversation about what comes up. That's how I describe myself most of the time is this ability to kind of hold on to the place that you're supposed to be. Yeah.
mm. There's such a big welcome in that, right? When I think about the fire and we're recording this in mid-February and the soup, and I just think like I want to be by that fire eating that soup.
Having a good full belly and full of belly laughs and a good cry and just a good time. Yeah.
Yeah. How long have you thought of yourself as a firekeeper?
Oh gosh. Um, it's interesting because I'm not long. Because I feel like I've been more of a gatherer of wood for the most part, for the most of my life. I've just been gathering wood, gathering like little branches, kindling, all of those things. I feel like I've been doing that my whole life. And it isn't until I'm going to say about maybe a year ago that I kind of just went, I think you've got enough wood.
Mhm.
You need to build the fire now. So I would say it's been a good year or so that I've been like, no, this is a year and a half too, that I've been like, no, you're good. Just build the fire. So
You know,
yeah.
I feel like that's by itself is such a like I want all young people to hear that image, and I think it's a really countercultural message and or image in a really important way because I feel like most of us are sort of steeped in the idea that we're supposed to have some sense of who we are and who we want to be as adults when we're 18, and then we're supposed to do the things to be that person. And for so many of us, it is a gathering process as we learn ourselves and learn life, right? And like when we get to the place where it's like, oh, I have enough kindling, now I can make the fire. Like that doesn't always happen at 18 or 22. Like for me, it was like 36. And like,
And I feel like at some level, it's not actually so much about what you think, it's what people come to you for that makes you believe that you're supposed to be doing that thing, right?
mhm,
You sit many times inside of like hard conversations where you don't have the knowledge and you realize you don't. And so you go and gather that knowledge. And then you sit in a new conversation and all of a sudden you realize you don't have another little bit of knowledge and you go and get them. Or you go and have a conversation and you realize there's knowledge you don't need to know. And
yes.
that process that I think only can come from other engaging with other people. I
Mhm.
don't think it's an internal thing that I've turned around and said, nope, you're good.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
It's been like I've had, lots of conversations with a lot of people, and I realize I know a lot.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
do a thing with that. I'm going to do a thing with that, perhaps.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Oh, gosh, I love that too, because that's also incredibly countercultural, right? To say, like, no, we have to lean into the web of interconnection to more fully understand ourselves, which I believe wholeheartedly. But certainly especially in countries like the States that are all like rugged individuality, right? Like that's pretty radical. Is it similar in Canada?
yeah, it is. I mean, I think we've we have a higher understanding, or we place higher importance on community. We have, generally speaking,
Mhm.
when times get hard,
Yeah.
it always reverts back to the individual, right?
Mhm.
So the flow is the same, right? We have socialized medicine, right? We're really big into caring for the people in our community, right? But I
Mhm.
don't think that that doesn't exist in the US either. So I think it's just this idea that we do it at a government level, not always, but then also have the same grassroots level, that type of thing. I don't think it's actually that different, to
Yeah.
be completely
Gotcha. Well, so what are you all up in these days? What are you in the thick of learning?
so deep. Are you ready?
I'm so ready.
Well, I don't know. So when I developed this little company called Grief Advocacy, everybody thought my name for the company was a little like, ew. Like, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to advocate for grief? You should do it, but don't put grief in the title. Right? There
Oh,
was all of these like um kind of people that didn't, most people didn't like it, is what I'd
mhm.
say. And it was really built because it, and I stuck to it. I stuck to the idea of it being grief advocacy, because grief never goes away.
Mhm.
And if we can build a relationship with grief, we begin to see, I guess, its existence as a reminder of what is important to us. And why would we want that to go away? So that was really where grief advocacy started. And what I am noticing and to get back to the question of what this is all about, what I'm up into, is now I'm sitting back going, okay, well, if I know what's important to me, right? What's worth swirling, what's worth missing, what's worth longing for.
Mhm.
And now I can imagine myself kind of writing a love letter to it, right? To all of
Yeah.
these things that I long for, that I miss. And my life and my legacy is that love letter.
Mm.
So I'm sitting inside of that last little piece right now. This idea that legacy is really a love letter to all the things that are really super important to you, that grief has taught you.
Yeah.
So it, it's not a little thing.
No.
Uh, that's the fire, right? That's the fire I'm building right now. So that's what I'm in all of.
Oh, wow. Legacy is a thing that comes up a lot, with some frequency, at least in my coaching practice. And the first question is always like, what even are people talking about, right? Like, are they talking about like their name on the wing of a hospital, or are they talking about something more intimate, right? And like, yeah, and I hear a real intimacy in what you're talking about. Would you expand a little bit on what you mean by legacy?
Sure. It's funny because I often, when I ask people what they think their legacy is going to be, I either hear, I don't have one, or I hear, well, I've got my will and I've got, my POA, I've got all of my advanced directives all done. So it's all gonna, and they start telling me the details of that. And I was like, that's not what I'm talking about.
Mhm. Yeah.
um, like, so what, tell me the stories of your life that you wanted to throw away, or that you have thrown away, and why.
Mhm.
And inside of those stories, inside of the grief, inside of the longing, you will come up with all of the things that are most important to you. So it could be connection, it could be pleasure, it
Mhm.
could be like laughter, it could be so many things, right? And or it could be cooking with somebody, it could be as simple as that, right? It could be my dogs, I miss my dog, I miss that like loyalty, right?
Mhm.
Typically around animals. So what does it mean to live your life with those being the hub of everything that you do.
Mhm.
So it turns, and that to me is what legacy is. It's the gifts that I am going to give my great, great, great grandchildren.
Mhm.
I can tell you a little bit of a story around it. You don't always know what it's going to be, right? Like, let's be,
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
my best friend died in 2015.
Mm.
And she didn't have children. She died, she was in her 40s, but when she didn't have children, she took care of her parents. She was devout, like a devout daughter. But she the interesting part, I think, is that my last interaction with her was me telling her I didn't feel like hanging out. She's like, we're going to go out. And I'm like, I actually don't really feel like it. Can we just
Mm.
reschedule, like one of those things?
Yeah.
And then 3 days later, she died.
Mm.
So I didn't have, that was the last, I let her down, was the last thing I did with her. And my last words were telling her I didn't feel like hanging out with her.
Mm.
Right. And so, what her legacy and what that piece has taught me about what's important to me is that my kids never ever leave the house without hearing, I love you. They never, and now I hear it first because they're older,
Mhm.
right? So now I hear it first. And I know that when their kids leave their house, if they
Mhm.
decide, that they will never let people leave without saying, I love you. And there's something inside of just that little simple thing that is my girlfriend's legacy.
Mm.
So that's the
Ah,
best way to describe it.
that's beautiful. And it actually flips on its head something I think about on occasion, which is tracing back sort of laughing at myself because like I think about sort of the inheritance of trauma and challenge,
Yeah.
right, over generations. And like in for a certain level layer of legacy, I can trace it back and go, oh, I can see how this led to this in these last few generations. But then I sometimes my mind drifts and I'm like, what are what piece of my current challenges are like passed down from my cave ancestor, right? Like, but
Right.
like I hear you flipping that on its head and rightly so, saying like there's also that beautiful lineage, right, that we're in the middle of,
Yeah.
right, and that we're keeping continuing in one way or another, whether it's genetically or not, right, there's still that impact we have on each other. um
True.
yeah.
And who would we be without it? Right?
Right.
Like, I wouldn't have that without her.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have that connection, that moment every single day, sometimes
Yeah.
more, right? I wouldn't have that without her. I have it because of her.
Yeah.
Uh, so that to me, I think is something worth holding on to.
is there a is there a ragged edge to your thinking about legacy in this moment, as in a place that
You
feels sort
mean,
of unknown?
oh, unknown. Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so, you have like, so I feel like we sit inside of our little comfort zones, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everyone does. We have these little fleeting, deep, like thoughts or feelings, and they're kind of over on the edge for the most part, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're like, oh, that's kind of edgy. I don't think I'm going to go there. Right? And you kind of hold it in and you go, okay, I'll like keep that like just here. And then, but every so often,
Mm-hmm.
you have to go to the edge, and and the edge reminds you of what you're capable of, and how important the thing you have in the middle is often, right? And so I love kind of living along that edge. I think that's the edge is the place to be. Like, if we go back to the original kind of idea around the lodge and the fire, um, that little warm place is in a forest, right? But the only way to get there is to come to the edge. Like, you cannot come to that place without hitting the edge.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to leave that place and hit the edge and go back to corporate, go back to, the capitalism, go back to all of those things so that I can still have the little lodge in the forest, right? I
Mm-hmm.
have to interact between those two lands,
Yeah.
right? And it's that interaction in the middle, and taking the step forward that I love standing inside of, just kind of looking out to see, okay, what's next? Like, what else is out there? Should we try? Do you want to try? What does that look like? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I really love that little ragged edge.
Yeah, it's really rich, and for a lot of us, it has its own unique discomfort to it. Is it? Yeah. Do you have a sense of how you distinguish between the discomfort of like, whoa, whoa, and the discomfort of like, like learning, growing, exploring?
Oh, well, yeah. I think when it's like, no, 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 you have a real deep sense of no.
Mm.
Um, Women are typically really good at that, right? We know when no, we know our no's, right?
So I think they've been trained out of us in so many ways. Like I think we have the tools, right? But I think we've been trained to doubt those tools, or at
And
least some of us.
if you've been like, traumatized in some sort of way,
Mhm.
and you go down, let's just, for argument's sake, say you were mugged,
Mhm.
right? You're saying no to the alley every night. Like every time you go down, have to walk down that alley, you're like, I'm not walking down that alley,
Mhm.
I'm a long way around,
Yeah.
right? There's just a sense of knowing. And I think, and it doesn't happen all the time, right? There's lots of times that I've taken a course and I'm like, that's not me. Like, that's
Mhm.
not what I need. And I think that's the beauty of judgment, right? Like, you have this alignment and you're allowed to kind of wax and wane, but you always know your North Star. And when you try to have to force things together, it's not going to work, right? Like, I left 25 years of corporate. I was in sales. I was a VP of a a mindfulness company. And I just turned around and I went, this isn't for me. I need to go do this thing. So I
Mhm.
was making great money to making programs accessible, which often means you don't make great money,
Right.
right? So, but I did that because of the alignment. I
Mhm.
did it because I knew I had to. There was no other way that I was going to
Yeah.
be able to look myself in the mirror in the morning.
Mhm.
Uh, so whether it was successful or it wasn't, it will never be the wrong decision,
Mhm.
right? Learning how to, and lots of things I've learned about in the past, like learning chakras, not my thing,
Mhm.
right? Glad I know it, but not my thing. Right? So I feel like there's all these different waxes and wanes through it, but you eventually find your alignment.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what are the tools, whether internal or external, that help you navigate all of this and even that journey to and from the edge?
It's all community. It's all
Mhm.
community, right? I, I feel like if I spent my life as a hermit, right, I would have wilder ideas of
Mhm.
the way the world is supposed to work. But being able to see seeing me on the faces of other people,
Mhm.
right? And being able to see their face in me, that
Mhm.
whole dance. Um, there's nothing more important than that connection.
Mhm.
And we're losing it a little bit, but that and writing, I love doing the writing. Yeah, so in the business world, it would be called networking. So I'm pretty good at that.
Mhm.
I just find having conversation with people, complete strangers, like I embarrass my children with that all the time. Right? You know that lady? I'm like, no, but she had a nice skirt and I thought I'd let her know. Right? She'll walk up to people and do that. I'm like, you absolutely do.
For sure.
Right? So I feel like it's really all about community and connection.
Mm.
And coming back and kind of absorbing it, reflecting, spending time in the past.
Mm.
So the
Yeah.
futures, right?
Mm. So when I think about spending time in the past, I think about sort of the slippery slope into rumination. Is that ever a thing for you?
all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I'm probably like the worst for it, right? They say like in grief, they often say you're sitting in a rocking chair and you're going into the past and you're going into the future. You're going into the past and thinking about all the things you'll never feel again. And then you're going into the future thinking of all the things you'll never get to feel.
Hmm.
And it's really important to kind of try and sit inside of that presence, inside of the moment, inside of right here, right now.
Hmm.
And for sure, that's where I try to live most of the days, right? Tending fire, you're building soup, you're inviting
Hmm.
people, right? Um, when, but I also know the importance of my ancestors and how they've A, been forgotten, B, the burdens and the heirlooms that they've brought me, that they've given, and my own history and how those pieces have been resolved. You could say healed, and how they formulate who I am today.
Yeah.
So that I feel like I think we don't give enough credit to that.
Hmm.
And so I'm not so much a future looker. Like I'm like, we'll see what happens,
Hmm.
right? I have a good sense about what this might be. I'm going to bring all of this knowledge and all of this learning with me.
Hmm.
And I'm going to do what is most important to me.
Yes.
Kind of is the way that I roll these days.
Yeah. That, I mean, I go right back to that image of that invitation, right? Of the fire and the bowl. I've been self-employed in one way or another for 20 years, and that to me has been the big game changer. Has been when I was trying to provide services or approaches that I thought people would like. It was always like, and once I said, I'm just going to do right, I'm going to answer my own invitation,
Right?
right? Then the people who want that invitation appear.
That's it. Your heart aligns with a particular part of work
Hmm.
and you can feel it. Like you can feel it go, oh, this is like someone will say it kind of flippantly. And you're like, I'm going to take that thing and I'm going to go super deep on it.
Hmm.
I'm done doing the mile wide and the inch deep. I just want it the other way around. I don't need
Hmm.
to know more. I
Yeah.
just need to go really deep on what I do know. That's
Yeah.
what that's yeah. So that's why legacy is so important to me. That's why I think grief is so important.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's such a simple question, right? Like, what's going on for you these days? And I'm like, what's going?
Yes, that's
Like,
where the good stuff is.
right? You kind of put your lasso around some big rock at the top, and you're like, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Right? So,
It's beautiful. It is. And I do want to ask you about grief. Um, because I know you have a background in hospice work. And I wonder if grief is exclusively about death to you.
oh, no. Oh, it's one facet of it.
Hmm.
It's such a multi-layered experience, right? That I don't grief and loss, I think is it's interesting to combine those two words, and we do it kind of flippantly, but the idea of loss, a job loss, financial loss, family loss, pet loss, like we can when we get married, we
Hmm.
lose independence,
Yeah.
right? We become empty nesters when our kids get older and we feel a little lost without having our wee ones being dependent on us as much
Hmm.
anymore. There's loss inside of everything. And I feel like that idea of grief is what, and I think that's why we need to build that relationship with it, right? Because it is in everything. And if
Hmm.
we ignore it, we are ignoring all the things that we love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love your example of getting married. That's one of the places where I really like to encourage people to grieve is in the midst of joy, right? Saying there's a trade-off here, and none of us are as monochromatic in our emotional landscape as we like to pretend, right? Like,
Doesn't work
yeah,
that way,
no.
right? I think it was Francis Weller who talks a lot about holding grief and gratitude at the same time, and how you can't have just gratitude because it's turns your life into this saccharine drip. And you can't have just grief because you'd just be swirling. And it's the empowerment of both that is
Mhm.
a life. And I'm that's not the quote, but that's what the quote means. Just clarify. That's kind of what he talks about.
The vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's beautiful, right? It's an invitation into, and part of the invitation I hear you making is an invitation into more of our wholeness, right? And our whole human experience.
Well, and grief, like let's be honest, right? Like we grieve the loss of a person
Mhm.
for sure. Don't get me wrong. And we talked about the rocking chair, right? What was, and what will never be, right? But there's also we grieve a loss of our own who we are.
Yeah.
And that's I think why grief is so important to embrace, because who are we if we toss away part of who we are and
Yes.
never look back, right? And I feel like that to me is why grief is just probably, in my estimation, so much more important than the hashtag happy.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
where you do your biggest work, right?
Hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, I really, gosh, I really appreciate that. I appreciate like the complexity and the richness of this invitation that you're making. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, yeah.
I'm
Wha-
so glad. Thank you.
Yeah, it is really quite beautiful, and I feel like I witness all the time ways that we try to um the big we try to make ourselves like more simple and make our lives more simple than they actually are, and in that way we miss a lot. And I think I see a lot of people left with a feeling of like, why does this life thing not feel quite right?
Right. And
Yeah.
we disguise it as like, oh, well, I've set a boundary. Like, I'm not going to watch Fox News.
Hmm.
I'm not going to watch CNN. Right. I'm not going to surround myself by people who, and fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Right. Like it is the biggest disservice to who you are to
Hmm.
not be surrounded by things that don't align with you. It's the only way you have judgment, right?
Hmm.
It's the only way you know not to vote for Biden or not to vote for Trump or whatever it
Hmm.
happens to be, right? You need those things in order to build who you are. And we're
Yeah.
so busy trying to protect ourselves.
Hmm.
We are forgetting that we will have nothing if we don't have adversity.
Absolutely, right. And that includes the sort of awareness of I think a lot of us feel it as an adversity of like with our mortality, right? And so we try to put up a barrier there too, and like, I'm gonna focus on that, right? And then we can sort of drive ourselves off a cliff that way.
Right? I mean, that's the reason why loneliness is such a big problem these days, right? We've got this loneliness crisis and we've got the rise of individuality, right? And it's this idea that I'm a sacred whole. And
Hmm.
and my opinion is yes, and you are nothing without community.
Yeah. I mean,
Right? Those
yeah,
two things exist at the same time.
yeah,
Right?
inherently, right? Like inherently we can't see or experience life except through this framework, right, of that we each were born into, and we can't see ourselves fully without our interconnection with each other. I totally agree with you there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, this is so fun.
Conversations happen like when you're sitting with people that don't agree with you. And if you can
Yeah.
just sit and accept the fact that you are not going to change their mind, and all I want to do is have a really good conversation about something,
Hmm.
it is amazing.
Hmm.
So, anyways, thank you.
That is beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing. As we start to wrap up today, I'm curious if there is a nonprofit that you would like to share.
Yes, I am going to push some edges with my nonprofit.
Love it.
Woo! The National Home Funeral Alliance.
Oh,
is who
yeah.
I am going to what do you want to call that? Evangelize right now.
Oh,
It's homefuneralalliance.org, and they support people who are interested and where it's legal to do funerals at home.
mm,
And they teach
yeah,
people, which I think
beautiful.
is a wonderful, beautiful option should people decide not to fork out $10,000
Yeah,
and
yeah,
want to save the earth a little bit.
yeah. And there's a real intimacy, right? That we have again separated ourselves from our um in sort of a misguided form of self-protection, right? Like we've lost the intimacy with death and like the way that can help us be with grief and process grief, right?
So it's so deep, right? Like I did a lot of death work before I came into the grief work, but I was on the board at the National Home Funeral Alliance, and spent a lot of time understanding the importance it is, even from a diversity perspective. So it hits a lot of really important notes. It's much more ecological, it's much more connecting, it's allows for, it's accessible, and it sheds a lot of the expectations around it.
Mm,
And I think it's a really interesting foray into putting death into the hands of love.
that was beautiful. Thank you. Thanks for highlighting that.
Thank you.
All right. Well, my friend, to you, Sarah, and to myself, and to anybody watching or listening, I wish us all ease and joy in the midst of whatever our learning curve. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.